When you get to that senior level, if you haven't been there before, you've never been there. It's growth, it's new learning. It isn't like you're trying to be an imposter or figure things out. When you're growing, there's always going to be this edge of trying to figure it, and you don't know it until you learn it, and it takes some time. And so I like to say, instead of trying to avoid it, just get good at operating in that uncomfortable space as a leader, because that's really what it's all about. That's where the growth comes from. And it isn't about what others are doing. It's about recognizing what you uniquely bring and bringing that at 150% in complement to what the others bring.
Welcome to You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. You are ambitious in life and in your career, but something is missing. You want to bring more of your passion to what you do. Because let's be honest, you pour a ton into your work, and it needs to mean more. I'm your host, Laura Eigel. I'm a mom, wife, PhD, coach, advocate, introvert, and indoor rowing fanatic. I'm passionate about living a life that's in line with my values. We'll give you the actionable tips and tools you need to lead with your values, make a difference, and have career success. The world needs more diversity and authenticity in the top jobs at organizations. Your leadership belongs there. You belong in the C-Suite. What gets you up in the morning? What drives your decisions? What do you stand for? No idea, not even sure where to start? I use my values to guide my life and career. It's the basis of how I've built boundaries for myself and stuck to them. Are you ready to dig into what matters to you? Go to thecatchgroup.com to download your free values worksheet. That's thecatchgroup.com to download your free values worksheet to get to your core values and take action on what matters most. Welcome to this week's episode of the You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. This week, my guest is James Madison. James is the CEO, speaker, trainer, and coach at On Purpose Life. He helps successful senior leaders leave burnout and overwhelm behind to lead winning teams in the achievement of extraordinary results. James is passionate about helping people get clear on what they want and get out of their own way to create their wildest dreams. James and I talked about the pain points that we are both seeing as we work with senior leaders in coaching and within senior leadership teams. We discussed pain points of not having hard performance discussions and the impacts that has on the organization and culture. We also talked about competing, specifically competing with your peers on your leadership team, and the impacts of siloed thinking versus having an enterprise leadership approach. We also talked about the importance of knowing your own strengths and the strengths of your peers and the power of that to get to a high-performing team. We also talked about the mistake of always starting with strategy to fix problems instead of getting to the root of them, like from team dynamics and just understanding lessons learned. We covered a variety of topics that I know will resonate with you, regardless of your level in the organization. So let's dig into this dynamic conversation. Let's get started. Well, I want to welcome you to the You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today, James.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to spend some time with you and just dig into some really good topics. But before we do that, I want to get to know you a bit better. So tell me about yourself, career history, and I have a soft spot for learning about what you value and how those have kind of shaped your career. So I'd love to hear more about you.
Yeah, thank you. So first off, I go way back. I'm an Army brat. So I grew up kind of all over the world, with my family, served in the military for myself for 4 years after college. And then I went to work in corporate America, operations supply chain for 25 years, consumer products. And for me, what I really loved about that entire period were the people. We used to say people, process, products. It didn't matter whether it was dog food or toothpaste or soap. It was always about the people for me. That's where I learned my love of coaching, was helping people develop and evolve processes. There's a continuous improvement,
Mhm.
curiosity side of me, and then produce something that we could actually see as a result. So I really enjoyed that. And after about 25 years, I decided to pivot. Before pivot was a cool thing during pandemic, right before
Uh-huh.
that, I pivoted out of corporate and decided I wanted to do something different. And I got into executive recruiting, which allowed me to focus on people and talking out of the operation, connecting, matchmaking, which was not even like work for me. I really enjoyed that. Then that led into coaching, formally doing a lot of coaching because even in the recruiting, I would spend a lot of time with people in transition talking about what are your wants, what are your values, what are your desires, what do you want to do in three? And so it was kind of a practice for coaching. And then I pivoted 100% into coaching and I primarily work with senior leadership teams and really helping the leader and the team come together and really gel. This is the first team. One of the things you probably see too is that, and I like to say, what at that level, what gets you to the table is not the same thing that will make you successful at the table.
Yes.
You see that, right?
Yes.
There's is no longer about a functional area. It's about sitting with the company hat on as a member of the team, being willing to challenge and push and ask questions the better for the business, not just protect or turf about a particular department or area. So that's the place I like to play because there's a lot of egos that come in, there's a lot of experience, and I know this, and being able to break that down. And I like to say helping each individual understand their superpowers, like
Hmm.
what they bring uniquely to the table beyond the functional expertise, and be able to see the others around the table superpowers as not a threat, but a complement to what they bring. And so then this team comes together and starts to perform. And the best part is that thing cascades down in the organization. That's
Mm.
where the magic happens. So that's a little bit about what excites me and what I love to do.
Thank you so much for giving us the background. And it sounds just from hearing your some of the storytelling that you just did that, continuous improvement and impact might be a value.
Yes.
Definitely the people side of development is definitely a value, maybe connection too.
Connection is a big one. Connection, inspiration, kind of, I would say like setting people free, releasing people from
Mm,
limits to be their full self is something I really love to do. Yeah, those are value and freedom is a big value of mine. And so freedom to be who you are and bring all
mm.
that you bring is something that I like to help others do as well. And fun. It's got to be fun. It's got to be fun. And it doesn't matter what you're doing. It's got to have an element of fun. That's always in there for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Well, I am really excited to dig in. So we share a couple of things in common. Well, we share a CPG background. That's
That's right. I saw
exciting.
your PepsiCo. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, we share
What
a
was it?
CPG.
Colgate Palmolive. So another
Okay,
big.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
So CPG background, and now we're coaches and we're working with senior leadership teams. So I would love to chat with some of the things that you have been seeing in the work that you do with senior leadership teams, because I would bet that we have some common pain points that we are seeing, and we're helping these individuals as leaders through coaching or through senior leadership team facilitation and tools and
Yes.
things like that. And so I would love to just kind of dig into a couple of topics. And you sort of alluded to some of these things in your intro, but let's like dig into a couple of these a little bit
Sure.
meatier in this
Yeah.
discussion. If that's okay, that's where we'll go next. So pain points that you are seeing in these senior leadership teams. What are some themes that you can share?
Yeah. One theme I see a lot is tolerating poor performance or lack of poor performance. I see that everywhere, and it's all for not wanting to create conflict with a particular individual. And I see it across the board. It takes a courage to really have those tough conversations, and sometimes people aren't in the right seat on the bus. Back to Jim Collins,
Yeah.
good to great.
Hmm.
I'll watch leaders really struggle to have those hard conversations because they think it's only about that person, and what they don't realize is it creates this effect on the whole organization when leaders tolerate poor performance or people that aren't in the
Wow.
right place.
Oh my
Sets a standard
goodness.
that they don't want.
It so does. And it goes all the way through the organization that is happening. It totally still happens at the highest levels. And you would think that by then we'd have figured this out, but people just are not equipped to have like good feedback conversations at the right time. I have seen leaders that are good at it, but to
Yes,
your point, it is a very common thing that happens even at that high level of leadership all the way down the organization. And the impacts of that are huge. And so the behavior that we allow, right?
that's right. That's right. Whatever we tolerate. And then, again, back to the good to great, like number
Mhm.
one job of the leader, get the right people on the bus, in the right seats, wrong people off the bus before you have strategy, vision, and all those things. And tolerating those types of performance sets an unintended standard and consequence that leaders don't realize is underneath the surface. That's huge in terms of trying to really drive things where they want to go.
Yeah, that is such a pain point. That is so true. And that can be taught. That's the interesting thing. It's
Yeah.
not rocket science, folks. And so but it's building that culture of feedback. It's doing it at that senior level. It's lots of
Yes.
things, right?
Yeah.
What other pain points are you seeing?
Before I leave that one of the
Yeah.
things that most leaders believe is that this will be very disruptive to have this conversation, and it's more
Mm,
disruptive to have it than not have it. And what
yes.
I've found is when they actually have it, the other person is actually relieved because they also get a sense that it's not the right fit or it's not working out, but kind of playing this charade. And I've seen it's what I call releasing people to their greatness.
Yeah.
Sometimes, if they're in the wrong seat or at the wrong time, having that honest conversation allows for a pivot or shift within the organization and sometimes outside. And so it
Yeah.
actually works out to be a win-win-win when those conversations are had. So I try to encourage having those conversations.
Yeah, I just had a similar conversation with the senior leader just this week, and they were trying to get a handle on, is it the capability of the person, or did we make this role like too big or whatever it is? And so they were just keeping giving this person a chance, a chance, a chance, right? And they were not performing. And so they're like, what are we doing wrong? And I said, sometimes the the role or the business or technology outpaces a person's capability doesn't mean that we don't still appreciate all of the work that they've done, right? All
Yeah,
the value that
right.
they do have. Is there another place for them in the organization like that does meet
Yeah.
them?
Hmm.
And so that they can get their goals met and you can still get your goals met. And how do we do that and how do we figure that out? And so
Yeah.
but they had that exact same conversation and it's like, it was a hard conversation for them to have, even just with me.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So to your point, it's a win-win-win.
It's a win. It
Setting
is.
it's back to the freedom, setting
Yeah.
people free to be able, because that person doesn't want to be in a role that they're not successful at.
No, no. And being clear is kind, I like to say. Be clear
Yes.
with people.
I
It's
said
actually,
that to
I
them
say,
too. That's it, James. I knew we would get along.
it's actually cruel. I say like this, it's actually cruel and unusual not to have that
Yeah.
conversation because both sides suffer and the impact on the organization is huge. Huge.
Yes. Clear
Hmm.
is kind, and you can
Clear is
deliver
kind.
tough messages with compassion for sure.
That's right. That's right.
Absolutely. All
Yeah.
right. So that one's an important one that we're
Absolutely.
both still seeing.
Yes.
What's another thing that you're seeing that leadership teams that you're seeing some of those points of tension?
Yeah. Points of tension around thinking that they need to be like others,
Tell me more.
right? Instead of recognizing what strengths they bring, what superpowers they bring, the comparison game, comparisonitis, right? Here's a word that I hate, imposter syndrome. I don't personally like that term because it labels something and makes it like okay to say that. But think about this. When you get to that senior level, if you haven't been there before, you've never been there. It's growth. It's new learning. It isn't like you're trying to be an imposter or figure things out. When you're growing, there's always going to be this edge of trying to figure it, and you don't know it until you learn it, and it takes some time. And so I like to say, instead of trying to avoid it, just get good at operating in that uncomfortable space as a leader because that's really what it's all about. That's where the growth comes from. And it isn't about what others are doing, it's about recognizing what you uniquely bring and bringing that at 150% in complement to what the others bring.
My award-winning book, Values First: How Knowing Your Core Beliefs Can Get You the Life and Career You Want, is now available in audiobook. Since the book released just last year, the biggest question that I've gotten from readers is it available in audiobook? In this book, you'll get to hear my most pivotal career stories and some of the successes of my clients as you learn about the Values First framework and how you can take action on your life and career. The audiobook is narrated by me, so if you love this podcast, you'll love the audiobook. Values First: How Knowing Your Core Beliefs Can Get You the Life and Career You Want is now available on Audible and iTunes. Yeah, you mentioned before recognizing each other's superpowers, and I think it is, man, this is so common, and it shows up in lots of different ways. This idea of competing with peers when you're in a senior leadership team, whether it's the top senior leadership team or a department leadership team, that dynamic plays out because you have your own team and you're usually trying to protect them, right? And so and it goes back to your idea of the first team. Like, who, when you think of your team, who is it? Generally, people think it's the people that are on their direct reports. That's my team.
Exactly.
But really, your team for first team is the team that you of your peers and your boss, right?
Yeah.
And often we don't feel that way. I was just coaching a person the other day and they're like, "Oh, I have to go to my senior leadership team meeting. It's such a, we never get anything done. We're always, talking about the same things in circles, and we have our own agendas." And so all of that kind of stuff, because sometimes it's competing, but oftentimes, to your point, they're thinking about their own vertical, right? And it's not, how can I work with my peers, and getting out of your vertical and having more of that enterprise view of the whole organization, which sometimes you might have to take a hit on your department for the good of the company. And it's really hard to get in that mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. Because again, usually what got you there was protecting and driving your particular function. But now when you sit at that first team table at the top, it's about the company-wide, organizational-wide benefits and not the individual. And that's I find that it's a hard place for people to transition their focus and let their guard down, get out of the silos, even to challenge others in their own area. Is people tend to kind of maybe just shut down and only speak when their area is being talked about, and encouraging them to get out and bring their unique talents to really help, again, the organization get better.
Oh, that is so true. I've been a part of, I'm sure you have too, different leadership teams at different levels of the organization. And like when somebody else's thing is on the agenda and you're just like, that's not super interesting. I'm going to maybe churn out some work real quick, or kind of look down on my phone. Like, what else can I get? You kind of check out, right? That's one symptom of that, because you don't feel connected to the outcomes of that work. And so it feels disconnected.
Very, very disconnected.
And so I think that happened. Oh my goodness, that happens so often. And so tell me more about the kinds of things and kinds of interventions that you work with teams to get them more connected back to this idea of recognizing each other's superpowers.
Yeah, because there's also a fear of, if I challenge or ask questions in their backyard, they're going to come after mine, right? There's this lack of trust. So I'm going to keep my mouth shut so that they don't come after me. But that isn't what's best for the team, right? To the 5 dysfunctions of a team, if you think of that model, needing to establish that trust. But I use an assessment called the Core Values Index. And the Core Values Index is about 4 unique human energies that we all naturally are wired to show up with. It isn't about what our strengths are or behaviors or performance, because we can all learn to perform however we need to and be good at something that also drains us. This says, what are you good at that actually gives you energy?
Yeah.
and recognize the areas that you might be good at or not that drain you, and then be
Hmm.
able to manage and show up with the superpower and collaborate or work with others that have a different one so that together
Hmm.
you have everything you need. And so that's been the biggest thing to break down some of that tension on a team is when they can see each other and say, hey, you
Hmm.
really have the strength of the details, right? The knowledge. That's your thing. You're the banker. I'm the visionary. That's where I love and live. Let's get together and see
Hmm.
how the details can support the vision instead of just being frustrated that the detail person's asking too many questions and wanting
Yeah.
to not let details get in the way of a good story,
Yeah, yeah. I love
right?
that. And I love you mentioned this just a minute ago, this fear of like you're gonna come in my backyard and I have to protect my, area. I also see this often when we're having talent conversations where leaders are talking about their great talent and then they're not open to feedback that peers have of people on their team. And
Right.
I think that's another example of like protecting their own team versus being open to hearing because they need to hear that feedback too on their
That's right.
people. And I think that's another and I think the impact is then that person just doesn't want to collaborate with them on anything, right?
Right.
And so it goes back to the competition. It's my people versus your people. There's so many topics where all of this kind of intersect, but I love your idea of understanding yourself and then
Yes.
understanding the strengths of others and tapping into that whatever the context of the conversation is, whether it's a strategy conversation, a people conversation, and almost celebrating those different kinds of ideas.
Yeah, and what I find is when we label them, there's four different
Hmm.
energies, right? There's this merchant love energy, there's this innovator wisdom, there's this banker knowledge, and then there's this builder power. And they each are a different presence of energy that we naturally have. And what I was doing a workshop the other day, and people shared that when they don't feel valued for what they bring, when people don't want to hear the details, when people don't want the questions, when people don't want to know the vision, when people don't want to hear how we can get it done faster, they shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And now you've lost this genius that someone was created to bring
Yeah.
to the team, and you're missing that because of that feeling of not being okay in a safe space to share that. So helping them recognize it individually, first of all, and everybody in the room going, oh, yeah, that's why our conversations about this click. That's why those are tense. It isn't about
Yeah.
the thing, it's about this presence of energy that I'm bringing to the situation because of how I look at it. And if we can look at both and find a place in the middle together, we
Hmm.
can really, and what happens is it depersonalizes conflict.
Yeah.
It isn't about me versus you. It's like I'm bringing this energy of do it now. You're bringing energy of how do we make it better? How do we find a
Hmm.
place in the middle where we can both agree and utilize both of those?
I love this so much, and I think there's such power in the self-awareness of what you're doing, and are you operating in your strength at the moment, and is there so much stress that like you can't even do that, right? And being aware of that, because I think for some of these teams, they're not even thinking about their strengths because they're not gelling holistically.
Exactly.
I often see like a lot of spin around, like you mentioned vision before, but strategic planning. Oh my goodness. What are our
Yeah.
priorities? What are our priorities? What are our priorities? They keep shifting, right? And just often just circular conversations, or their priorities are like, 100 pages deep. Like, okay, well,
That's right.
that's not a priority, clearly. So
Yeah.
so I'm wondering, do you see this come up also in that space too? And how should we think about it
Yeah.
in terms of strategy? Like, where do you start? There's so many different pain points, I guess.
Totally. And what happens is when I take a team and help them understand themselves,
Yeah.
then I'll actually map them across the four areas. And then
Mm-hmm.
they see the makeup of the team
Yeah.
and they understand what do we say? Teams and organizations are perfectly designed to get the results they achieve.
Mm.
They are designed for whatever they're producing. And so when you can
Yeah.
see in the mix, we most of the teams I work with have a lot more creative types, the wisdom and knowledge, the vision, very few in the banker detail side. And yet you need to start a problem or goal with what are the facts around where we are, where we're
Hmm.
going, what's been done. Then once that's understood and grounded baseline, then move into wisdom, creative problem solving, ideas, best approaches, then connect that to the bigger vision and enroll the people, part of that. And then the last step, then execute. And what's interesting is when I share that, teams go, oh my gosh, I can now see where we get into trouble. We start out with the action first, then
Yeah.
we don't get the outcome, but we never really went back to look at the data of where we are or get to the root cause of what's going on. We
Yeah.
chased after a symptom. And because we're more wired that way, we'll just keep creating new iterations of that, but we don't actually ever nail the thing.
You're so right. They start with strategy.
Start with strategy.
They always start with strategy. And strategy, and some of these big companies, like the ones that like we grew up in, like there are like processes for all of that, right?
Yes, that's right.
And it's like deeply embedded, but a lot of these companies do not have, I don't know, the discipline that some of
Right.
the bigger ones. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Potentially, maybe it's shifts in senior leadership, needing to be more dynamic, and then shifting strategy to match that, whatever the industry or technology is doing. But strategy is always okay. Start with strategy first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of, and what's funny is I can show a team why they start with strategy first because a majority of them are wired with that innovative vision, energy
Hmm.
that they bring. So of course they're going to naturally show up there and skip past the details. And
Yeah.
in most of these groups, those detail-oriented people that love the details, love to mine for them, are the minority in those groups,
Hmm.
right? And so they get skipped past, and then it's off to strategy and then execution. We didn't achieve it. All right, let's create a new strategy. Let's create a new
Yeah.
strategy. Versus, let's get into the details behind what didn't work. What's the
Yeah.
root cause? Why? Root cause. Now
Hmm.
let's go problem solve the root cause, not the symptom. And now we're going to actually see better results. That's what I see more than anything.
You're so right. Or we need to hire a different consulting firm to help us with the strategy that didn't work the first time.
Yeah, so just even the team I was with the other day, them recognizing, wow, we kind of over-index on that creative side. We don't
Hmm.
have as much on the practical side. So we need to be aware when we go into thinking about something to pause and actually allow that energy to come into our space and have input because we know
Hmm.
that it's valuable before we just run off and do what we like to do.
Yeah, I love that you're talking about this assessment. I use the Hogan assessment and do similar. It's a little bit different in terms of the scales that you're describing, but I'm sure they are comparable in terms of some of the
Sure.
same things. But some of the outputs are the same. So it's like, okay, here's the team makeup, and
Yep.
then like, okay, so this is what we're doing, and this is why we might be having some of these problems. And to your point, like if we're over indexing here, then we have to be very intentional and change the way we're doing things. So to your point, you maybe it's spending more time in execution. For some teams, it potentially could be the opposite. It's we are execution driven and we're not spending enough time on long-term vision. And so we're
That's right.
always firefighting. Yeah, I had a senior team engagement not too long ago where they had their wish list of priorities, and they were all really good at the details at all of that, but they could all operate at a high level in chaos is what I
Yes.
would say.
That's
And
right.
so sometimes they were creating it. It was
Yes.
fascinating. And so, but they weren't consistent with the strategy. It kept shifting because they
Right.
weren't patient enough, and they
That's
didn't
right.
have the intentionality of the long-term planning time. So it's interesting to see that like some teams skew one way, skew the other, but at the end of the day,
Mhm.
like the makeup of the team is important. And back
It
to
is.
your recruiting days, right? Like
Yeah,
getting those right people, like to your point, getting the right people on the bus
that's
and
right.
knowing what you need, I think is another huge skill that as senior leaders we're maybe still not so great at either.
Yeah, and think about this. A lot of times we hire people like ourselves.
Totally.
So when I put that chart up there, somebody said the other day, "Oh my gosh, I can see why I hired my whole team." And my
Mm-hmm.
takeaway is I when I go create a project, I need to pull people in that have these different, not only talents and skills, but these different unique perspectives that they bring.
Hmm.
So we're more well-rounded.
Yes.
And back to your point about the firefighting, I always like to say, like, when you have a culture of firefighting and you respond to the fires, you breed arsonists.
Ooh,
People
yeah,
learn that setting the fire is how you get the attention. Then the firefighting is celebrated, and that
totally.
creates more firefighters. But
Yep.
what about the fire marshals that are making sure the fire never happens? That's in the background, never seen. It's not fun, but that's where you really move the organization.
I love that so much because you are so right. It is the culture is what you incentivize. And if you're incentivizing and like literally celebrating, oh, this person just did this amazing thing and they were reactive and they did it all on their own. And that's what your culture is. You are training people to do that.
Right. And if you go back to what I talked about the details, if you take that fire and you go do the root cause analysis on it and you get into the data, what caused it and what could we solve for that this kind of thing would never happen again? Now you're working at the right level and you're putting out even potential future fires.
Yeah, yeah. Have you seen this idea? So I know we talked about vision a little bit. As I get into companies, people do vision, mission, values, something, but it's like
Yes.
basically the DNA of what the organization wants to be or aspires to be, and usually some of their purpose or the meaning behind it, right?
Yes.
And
Hmm.
then there's the team that they've hired to do that. And so they think, to our point earlier, they think that they have done that, but oftentimes they have not. And so, how do you reconcile that with an existing team that's sitting within a culture that may not be reflective of all the things that they need to do?
Yeah, I talk a lot about, this concept of circle of influence, circle of
Mhm.
concern. I use that like I
Love
use
it.
it this morning, like every day, because there's all these things that people are concerned about. But okay, great. We're inside this big, huge company. What's the influence circle that we have influence over? It's
Mhm.
our people, it's our process, it's our strategies and visions within that. Let's start there.
Mhm.
Then as we increase influence, it gets bigger. We start to kind of take care of some of those things out there. But let's first start with what we can control.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you're familiar, one of my favorite concepts is the one thing from the book, The One Thing. Have you heard of that? The One Thing?
Tell me more about that.
The One Thing, it's by Gary Keller, and it's
Mhm.
this idea that there's if you can ask yourself this question, you have all these things that could possibly happen. What's the
Mhm.
one thing that I could do such that by doing the one thing, everything else I need to do becomes easier or unnecessary? It's the first
Mhm.
domino, is the way they describe it. So if I can think of what's the one thing that where there's synergies on other things, I don't need to do 10. Let me just do the one, like the bowling example, right? You hit that one pin, the others fall over. You don't hit 10 pins. And so helping them really get clear on what's the one thing I can do next. And that creates momentum that then involves thinking about what is the next one thing. It's just simply slowing it. It's almost like the 80-20 rule, Pareto principle on steroids.
Yeah.
One thing. And
Yeah.
just really slowing down to do that to create momentum.
And it's so fascinating because if you have a team that knows each other's superpowers and they know themselves, or they're getting to know themselves as well, I bet you probably can get to the one thing a lot faster than a team that doesn't. And there's probably a bunch of one things that might be in conflict with each other.
Exactly. And what's interesting is I've done this work. Usually we do the work about who they are and how they work
Mhm.
together. Then into strategy becomes what's the one thing we could do
Yeah.
next towards the vision. And
Yeah.
everybody goes, no, 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 no. We have to do all 10 things. And then we go through and evaluate them. And they recognize when they pick the one, it actually touches three or four of the others. It will naturally connect them. And the effort will be, call it the multiplier effect of the other
Yeah.
things. Once they do that, once they get more comfortable saying, okay, what's the one thing? What's the
I
one thing?
I love that. And I also loved what you mentioned before, the it connects some of the things together and then it makes some of them unnecessary. And that
Unnecessary.
I mean, we're saying yes to so many dang things because you can fit it into the strategy, you can connect it to the strategy. You're like, well, it kind of fits in here. Sure, go ahead and do it. And we're never saying no to stuff. Like
That's the
every
other
new
pain point, not saying no to things.
Ah, that is such a
Yes.
big one. Like, if we could if we could get senior leaders, if we're saying yes to something, then what are we saying no to? There used to be a visual that I love to show, like if one senior leader asked, and this happened all the time in my corporate career, a senior leader asked a question, and the work that downstream effect caused just because they were asking a question that they actually were just curious. They didn't need to know the answer to, but like a month later, they find out that like 4 people have been working on it for 4 weeks straight.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
And so like people are watching you, they want to do what you ask, right? And they're looking for your direction. So they're taking your direction at your word. So whatever questions you have, wherever your time is spent, like all of that kind of stuff on steroids. And I think people in the senior leadership kind of lose that. They
Yeah.
forget
Right.
the ripple impacts of, well, so-and-so said to do it. Okay, well, go ahead. And so it generates work for everybody.
Generates lots of work. Yeah.
And we're never telling people to stop stuff.
Yes. That would be the other number one,
Uh,
2 pain point is doing so much good, which we know good is the enemy of great. And saying no to good things. A lot of times leaders will say, I need more people to get more work done because more work's coming. And I'll say, what if you just take some work off their plate and allow this other reprioritized work to come on? So it becomes
yes,
this natural pruning process. And they're
yes.
like, oh, I have permission to tell people not to do certain things
You do.
because you're the leader,
Mm-hmm. It's amazing. Like,
right?
and the freedom and the autonomy and the empowerment and the trust that you get from folks, they will follow you through a brick wall. Like you tell them we are doing this, but we are deprioritizing this. Okay,
Exactly.
sign me up to work on your team. That is a differentiator for sure of senior leaders that are doing it well, that they can make those decisions fast to deprioritize stuff that, like you said, saying no to good ideas, saying no
Yes.
to good ideas, or at least
Yeah.
even put it in a hopper for maybe later.
That's right.
Let's put it in the maybe list for the
That's right.
next year and we'll evaluate it later, but we don't have to say yes to everything.
That's right. I like to say it can be deleted, deferred, delegated, or just do it now. Like there's a way
Yeah.
to go through those. And what you start to do when you do that is then team members start coming when a new task comes up. They say, "Hey, here's what I'm proposing that we drop off." It just
Yep.
made the leader's job to say, "Agreed." Now
Yes.
you show people that there needs to be this prioritization, not just a continual adding to the plate.
Oh, for sure. Oh my goodness. Well, I have really enjoyed chatting with you, and I feel like that's enough pain points to talk about today.
That's enough, right? I agree.
But I have so enjoyed connecting with you today
Yes,
and just talking shop, and it feels like some of the things that I'm seeing you're absolutely seeing, and
totally.
I'm sure that the leaders listening now can resonate with so many of them. So I'd love to know, what's the best way for us to connect with you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn at James F. Madison. You can find me on LinkedIn, send me a direct message. Also, go to my website, onpurpose-life.com. And there's a little application there they could fill out if they want to learn more about what I do or just have a powerful conversation about anything that resonated with them today.
Awesome. I love it. And we will put both of those links in our show notes for this episode. Well, I just want to thank you so much for spending time with me today, James. I want to thank you so much for listening to the You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. If you are enjoying this content, please remember to rate and review on Apple Podcasts. By leaving a review, you are helping others find this content. We will be featuring 5-star reviews on air in upcoming episodes. Editing and support for the podcast is done by S&E Podcast Management. To get more tips and tools to help you live a life guided by your values, go to thecatchgroup.com. Keep your boundaries and take care.